Testing. Good evening and welcome to this evening's Agenda Briefing Forum. This is not a decision-making forum. It is the briefing on the agenda for the Ordinary Council meeting, which will be held next Tuesday, the 27th of February 2024. I'd like to remind everyone in the chambers to ensure that comments are respectful to the Council and all meeting attendees, including city officers and those in our public gallery. Please note this meeting is being live streamed. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we are meeting, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. There are no announcements tonight. Item 4 is attendance. Councillor Clark has provided an apology for this evening and all other councillors are in the chamber. Item 5, disclosures of interest. Bianca Sandry, Director of Community Services, has declared an impartial interest in item 10.4.1 as she has previously provided her professional opinion on this application and in her previous role and has not been involved in the preparation of this report. Are there any councillors who wish to disclose an interest? Councillor Ladder.
Thank you. I've got a couple tonight. On item 10.1.2, proposed amendment to Town Planning Scheme number 24 For Sherwood Reserve, I declare an impartiality interest as I submitted a deputation on behalf of a community group for the June OCM before being elected and know some of the people who've submitted comments on the amendment. For item number 10.1.5 on the local planning scheme, declaring a proximity interest since I own a business that leases a property, live and own a property in the planning precinct areas. And for item 11.3, a potential land acquisition for parking in Maylands, declaring a financial interest because I own a business in the town centre that would potentially benefit from increased parking in the area. So I will leave the room for those last two and stay in the room for the first one. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor?
Yes, item 10.1.5, local planning strategy, a proximity interest. I own property in one of the areas referred to in the local planning strategy. Thank you.
And you'll be leaving the room? Yes, okay. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. Likewise, 10.1.5, the local planning strategy. I have a proximity interest as I own property and live in the area in the map.
Thank you. Councillor Eveson.
Yeah, same item and same interest. It's a proximity interest. My residential address is within one of the maps that's shown in this report for the LPS. So I'll have to leave the room.
Thank you. Councillor Sutherland.
Yeah, the same for me. 10.1.5, proximity interest as well.
And you'll be leaving the room. Yep. Councillor Sazowski.
Thank you. Mine is also for 10.1.5 local planning strategy. My mother owns her home right on the border of the subject area for the Morley Station precinct, so it's an impartial interest and I'll be staying in the room.
Impartial.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'd like to declare an interest in item 10.4.1, which is the proposed alterations and additions to the concrete batching plant. One of the directors is known to me through my role as mayor. It's an impartial interest and I'll be staying in the room. I'll now move on to item 6, deputations. This evening we have 4 in-person deputations. I'll explain how the process works. Each person who is presenting a deputation will be invited to come forward and speak at the microphone for up to 5 minutes. As we get close to 5 minutes, I will let you know so that you conclude your deputation. Once you have finished, the councillors may ask some questions. So the first person is in relation to item 10.1.5, the local planning strategy. Kate Bainbridge is in attendance speaking in support of the officer's recommendation. And the microphone.
There we go. Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and councillors.
Sorry, I'm just sorry. Before you commence, councillors who have declared an interest in this item, if you could please leave the room. That's the advice I've been given.
Part of the briefing, part of the process.
Thank you.
No
Thank you.
problems.
Please proceed.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and councillors. I'm Kate Bainbridge from Urbis, here tonight to speak to you on the local planning strategy and just basically to reiterate my support from our submission that we made on the strategy to include the Maylands Peninsula Hotel site within the Maylands District Activity Centre area. It's owned by Endeavour Group, who have great ambitions to redevelop the site for a mixed-use development in the future. So we look forward to the council hopefully adopting the strategy whenever it can get a quorum, of course, and working with the city officers to develop provisions that are appropriate to ensure an appropriate development can eventuate on site. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you. I'll just ask if any councillors have questions. No, thank you very much. The next deputation is in relation to item 10.4.1. Paul McQueen is in attendance speaking in support of the officer's recommendation.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the council. I think I prefer to speak to you without the microphone.
I think we need it for the live streamings.
I'll stand away. Am I clearly audible,
Yes.
Madam Mayor? So good evening to all the councillors, to you, Madam Mayor, and to the officers of the city. Tonight's function by me in terms of delivery of this presentation is rather straightforward for two reasons. One, with great respect, we support the recommendation and all the work that's been done by the city officers and the expert engaged by the city. And as you will see from the report, your independent expert has verified the integrity of the work carried out by our independent expert team, one of whom is here tonight, Mr. Reynolds. The next point I'd like to make is that the recommendation has withstood some 12 months worth of mediation in SAT, multiple meetings, multiple iterations of the report, and multiple changes to the additional noise attenuation measures that will be implemented as a consequence of this approval, if granted by you. Turning to the nature of the recommendation, I would invite you, either now or later this evening or as part of your deliberations, to contemplate what the recommendation actually does. There are really two components to it. The first component is recommendation 1, which makes an adjustment to a previously imposed condition 20, allowing for the same number of hours but a modest adjustment to change the permissible starting time from 6 a.m. to 4 a.m. If you then look at part 2, there are some 5 additional obligations imposed. So the price that the applicant is happily paying for a relatively modest change in hours is significant. Comes at significant expense and investment. But we're wanting to work collaboratively with the city to protect the community, and that is the outcome that this council will be delivering if it adopts the recommendation. A few other points to stress. This isn't approved use. We have an approved development. So this is about changing it to give a better outcome to the community. It's not about considering whether or not the use is appropriate, nor is it about considering whether the operation should remain. I just want to stress that. I'm sure you've all read the report and it's clear from it. There's no one speaking against us tonight. And indeed, your officer's report points out that there have been no noise complaints in relation to the operation. We are proud as a company of the fact that we operate a much needed facility in close proximity to residential dwellings, but we are perhaps the leading manufacturer of concrete in Western Australia. A lot of our other competitors are unregulated. We are self-regulated. We will adhere to the conditions. You will deliver a better outcome to the community. And as is set out in the report, I urge you, subject to any questions you may have of me or my colleagues, there are representatives of the company and my instructor, Mr. McGlue, as well as Mr. Reynolds. We'll happily answer any of your questions, but the argument in favour is compelling. Please don't send us back to SAT for a very expensive and time-consuming hearing when the answer, with very great respect, is obvious. Your officers have put it forward and we embrace it. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you this evening.
Thank you for your deputation. I'll just ask if councillors have any questions for Mr. McQueen.
Just one.
Councillor Osazowski?
Thank you. Thank you for your deputation. Very quick question. You just mentioned that the report said that there were no complaints received for noise. Are you able to highlight for me in the report where it says that, please?
Certainly. Okay, page 390, under heading Current Land Use and Operations, second paragraph under that heading, second sentence. City officers are not aware of any direct communication from residents to date regarding noise other than the above-mentioned concern about plant operating times, which was loosely linked to noise. The city's records indicate that to date the city has not identified any non-compliances relating to noise emissions from the plant, and no compliance matter has been formally registered in that respect. I hope that clearly answers your question, Councillor.
Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Queen, for coming in with your team. Sorry, just to clarify, I'm so sorry, we haven't met. What's your role in are you a planner or is this your company? Sorry, I wasn't sure. What
I'm a
perspective?
barrister.
Okay, thank
I'm here
you.
on instructions from LAB and I specialise in planning and environmental law.
Awesome, thank you. I wasn't quite sure. Can I ask if the company's received any complaints about noise?
So if the company has, I will check, but as far as I'm aware, no. I'm told by our environmental health manager, Mr. Stevens, who you see with the gentleman with the beard in the middle, that there have been no.
Awesome, thank you. Also, just wanted to check, I know obviously the conditions have been worked out, you know, with your noise people and the city's noise people to try and achieve the best outcomes for our residents. And lots of the conditions look like they are operational in nature, I guess. How can you see that, what assurances can we have that they're going to achieve the noise reductions that we require?
There's been very, very extensive scientific investigation by Mr. Reynolds. We had a peer reviewer from the East Coast review the work, and Mr. Warpenius, who is Reverberate, the council's appointed noise consultant, has evaluated, tested and put us to very stringent requirements to meet the noise regulations. In addition to being satisfied that we meet the regulations, there are extra, not just management operations, but noise attenuation measures that are being implemented so that we can be certain we will meet the requirements of the regulations. Bear in mind that the regulation at 4 a.m. is the same as the regulation at 6 a.m. We're already operating with approval from 6 a.m, but we're putting in place extra measures. So it's not just operational, it's noise attenuation measures, and you'll see that we're required to submit reports indicating that we have complied, and you'll also see that before we're allowed to commence operations, the conditions require us to implement all of those measures to the satisfaction of your officers. So we cannot start with the additional 2 hours until such time as we've implemented all those measures and your officers have checked them. So I think there's a large degree. The other thing is, without putting too fine a point on it, the residents will soon let us and you know if we're not complying, but we're comfortable that we will, and we have been up to date. My instructor, Mr. McGlue, has just given me a note, so I'll just consult that if you don't mind, and he reminds me that monitoring equipment, as proposed by your noise consultant, is required to be implemented as a management measure. We accept it, so then we will be required to give those readings if called upon to do so.
Fantastic, thank you. Because I'm sure for if I could ask a follow-up, please?
Go ahead.
Thank you so very much. So I'm sure for our residents, I understand the noise requirements at 6 a.m. might be the same as for 4 a.m, but I'm sure for our residents, they might not feel that same distinction. So I see in the recommendation, and you've referred to noise monitoring requirements. I see in the recommendation that's an annual report. Can you please explain what that will look like or how those measurements would be done?
I was going to say I'm a humble barrister, but that's probably a mischaracterisation. Nice. What I will say is that I know very little about noise science. However, you record the emissions, they are logged, then they will be presented in a format which can be scrutinised by one of your technical officers or by, say, Mr. Warpenius, if required to do so. So it's a science that's very precise. The locations are determined. The recordings are required to be made, and then the data is required to be presented in a report, which is understandable by people like Mr. Reynolds rather than people like me.
Sure, appreciate your humble approach to that. Could you please explain then, so sorry, will the city be provided with a report of the noise of a whole year, like at the end of the year? I don't understand what that report is going to look like.
I'll check with Mr. Reynolds so that I answer your question entirely accurately. So I confirmed with Mr Reynolds that we'll have all the readings. The format of the reporting is entirely in the city's hands. We will deliver whatever format is asked of us, and all the information is there to be provided.
Terrific. Thank you very much. I have nothing further then.
Any other questions? I just have one. Just to be clear for council, if a decision was made by council not to approve or not to accept the officer's recommendation, what do you think would be the next steps?
I'm confident I would be instructed by Lavin and the client to proceed to a hearing in SAT. Speaking candidly, Mayor, given you've asked me the question, and I'm sure your colleagues have read the report, your expert agrees with ours. If we went to SAT, there wouldn't be an opposing point of view. I would call our expert, who would say to the judge, we comply with the noise regulations, in fact we go better. I would then ask Mr Warpenius in cross-examination if he'd read the report. I'd ask him to refer to correspondence between his office, our experts, and I would establish that he agrees entirely with us that we meet the noise regs. I'd then call your planners and say, you've written a report confirming. I don't want to keep going on about it, but it would be, I believe, an unassailable case. It would be extraordinary to think how the SAT would rule against us in light of all the evidence. So I'm trying to save my client and the city the money of going through what I would consider to be, with very great respect, Madam Mayor, a completely unnecessary hearing and a waste of ratepayer money and my client's money.
Thank you very much. So we'll now move on to the next deputation, which is in relation to item 11.1. Greg D'Orazio is in attendance, speaking in support of Councillor Bull's notice of motion reserve reallocations.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, Deputy Councillor staff. My name is Greg D'Orazio. I'm here representing Bayswater City Soccer Club. Back in 2019, we came with a proposal to redevelop Frank Drago Reserve for better facilities for women, disabled facilities and better ground utilisation. This was unanimously supported by Council and the concept drawings were warmly received. Unfortunately, our progress was hampered by COVID at the beginning of 2020 and hence the progress of the project was halted. Now that we've come out of the other side of the pandemic, we've started to pursue this again. We decided to engage professional services and was recommended Brad Patch. Brad is extremely capable and experienced in delivering much larger projects than the one we are proposing. We believe the best man to deliver a product the council and community will be proud of. We are so confident in Brad's ability that we believe if given this grant, this project will go ahead with the adequate funding from all tiers of government with a contribution from the club. The timing, however, is super critical. Given the pending elections next year and the time Brad will require to produce the business plan and feasibility study, and also allow him the time to lobby the tiers of government for the funding to be included in their campaign commitments. We have full support of the local member, Lisa Baker, who has organised a sports minister to visit our club in the coming weeks to discuss funding. The club is desperate for ground space and facilities. We have grown to 800 playing members this year alone, with multiple women's teams and girls' teams in almost every age group. This due largely to the success of the Matildas, and also a lot of credit has to be given to the club for the way it has conducted business in recent years. The club has also maintained the facilities very well, but given the ageing building, the asbestos that's in it, the lack of female facilities, the lack of disability access, the poor orientation of the clubhouse given the footprint, it's time money was invested into Frank Drago Reserve to meet the minimum requirements for the club to facilitate all community members that want to participate in the game. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you. I'm just going to declare an interest. The deputy named a person that I know, Brad Patch. So that's an impartial interest and I'll be staying in the room. Any questions, councillors? Deputy Mayor.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. D'Orazio, for your deputation. So this deputation is with regards to item 11.1, not 11.2?
Oh, I think it's 11.2.
No, that's okay. But I understand that you are registered to give two deputations. Is this correct?
No, just the one. It's not 11.2. Sorry.
To 11.2?
Yes.
Okay, so I will
Oh,
write-
sorry, that was, I was provided that you were doing two deputations, but it's just one
It's on
deputation.
11.2. Yes.
11.2. Sorry, councillors, I had the wrong information.
It is okay.
Yeah.
I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? No, thank you very much for your deputation. Thank you. Councillors, we've received 3 written deputations tonight. One in relation to item 10.1.4, proposed closure of pedestrian access way between Rowe Place and Bramwell Road, Noranda, from Nicole Ferrara. And 2 are in relation to item 11.3, notice of motion, Councillor Peterson Pick, Deputy Mayor, potential land acquisition for parking in Maylands, from Mick Heap and Lois Moore. These have been provided to councillors and are available on the city's website, and I will take those as read. So I'll now move on to item 7, which is questions on agenda reports. We'll begin with items that were the subject of deputations, the first being 10.1.4, proposed closure of pedestrian access way. Does any councillor have a question on that item? No. The next item is,
Just let me give an update.
the next item is 10.1.5, the local planning strategy, and the CEO wishes to give an update.
So councillors, just for your information, obviously there was a lot of declarations of interest last week. We've gone to the department to seek an exemption. We've conversed with them today and they've advised us that the outcome of that exemption will be delivered to the city by Thursday of this week in time for next Tuesday's OCM. So we'll have that information on Thursday and we'll circulate that out to all councillors.
Before I ask anyone to leave the room, I'll just check, are there any questions on that item? No, everyone can stay in the room. Okay, the next item is 10.4.1, the proposed alterations and additions to the concrete batching plant. Councillor Johnson?
Yeah, I do. Thank you. I guess what I want to have assurance of is that there's some condition in this, in the recommendation that will ensure that we're achieving the outcome that we're trying to achieve, which is less noise for residents between 4 a.m. and 6 a.m. So I can see lots of conditions related to what the applicant has to do. I'm just want to check about the reporting requirements, please, what that might be like, what a breach of those conditions might mean if the noise is too loud, what opportunities residents or the city have to enforce them or refuse.
I'll go to the Manager of Planning.
Through you, Madam Mayor. First of all, the applicant needs to update the environmental management plan. They need to install the measures which have been listed in the report. They need to train their drivers, and they need to make sure that all the trucks which they're using are also registered as meeting the requirements which are outlined in the report as well. Prior to actually starting any earlier operating times, they need to submit the updated report. The city's officers will review it with the city's noise consultant. They also need to establish that that number which the city's noise consultant talked about this evening, which is detailed on page 395, where it talks about the annual noise monitoring is required to demonstrate ongoing compliance with noise criteria, and he talks about a preferred location where that needs to be situated. Any complaints to the city have to be in writing, and obviously the city's environmental health officers would respond. We only respond to written complaint, but there is obviously their annual reporting requirement as well in there.
Can I ask a follow-up, please? With particular regard to the annual reporting requirement, what does that mean? Does that mean that they just do one measurement once a year? Does it mean they measure for a whole year? What do you get?
Through you, Madam Mayor. Again, on page 395, where it talks about the general site management controls, the report, which comes in every 12 months, needs to outline the compliance to the noise conditions and specifically any departures to these requirements during the preceding 12 months. So they need to make the city aware of any departures of those noise recordings. Similarly, the concrete batching plant already operates with some very stringent dust monitoring, which along similar sorts of lines where they need to provide the city with their departures to the requirements, and if they don't, there's obviously quite significant compliance action which could be taken. So they're very well aware of the stringent conditions which are already on them, and this will only add to those requirements.
Thank you. Can I ask two more questions, please, to follow up? Thank you. So on the annual reporting, so say for hypothetically, council approves the application next week. They go off and do whatever they need to do. Then 12 months later, they give the city a report saying we breached the noise conditions this many times, or we didn't breach the noise conditions that many times. Is that a correct understanding of what you've said?
So you're saying, through you, Madam Mayor, so you're saying that if they make us aware of departures, of what action we'll take? Is that?
No, is that the only way we'd find out if there were breaches of the noise conditions between 4 a.m. and 6 a.m. is if the company self-reported 12 months later?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, unless there's a complaint made, and then the city's officers would go and take noise recordings.
Okay. Yeah, I'd be interested in a condition that was something more, either more proactive or more immediately, more time sensitive rather than waiting for a year. So that might be something I might explore. If I could ask you just another question about, in general, compliance. How's the dust monitoring compliance going? What sort of reports are we getting, and has the company been compliant with the conditions?
Through you, Madam Mayor, my understanding is that they have been generally compliant. Where there's departures, then they need to address how they're going to mitigate those departures. I would need to take on notice the actual details to ensure that I'm providing the correct information. I'll need to check with environmental health officers. My understanding is that they've been generally compliant.
Generally compliant. Yes, it'd be really useful to know that before the next meeting, please. Thank you.
Councillor Osazowski.
Thank you. And just to follow on from those questions there, in regards to the dust monitoring, are we able to also find out who's doing that monitoring? So are we doing that monitoring, or are they doing that monitoring? And at what intervals are we doing that monitoring? And then that will lead into my next question.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the existing concrete batching plant has 26 conditions of approval on it. There's a number of them relating to dust, and there's a number of ways in which they need to undertake that monitoring. I do have the conditions here. So there's monitors at the rear of the site and at the front of the site. And they take those readings. The gentlemen that were here this evening, their environmental consultant, Mr. Stevens, he's a qualified environmental person, beg your pardon, but he is responsible for monitoring the dust on the site. So they need to provide them every quarter, and they can't provide them no later than 30 days after each quarter. So we do receive them every quarter, and it needs to be within 30 days. And there's quite specific exceedances which they can't exceed, and if they do, they need to bring them to our attention. There's also an annual report which shall be submitted by no more than 30 days after each calendar year to which the data relates. and the dust monitoring shall be continued indefinitely. So it's not a time limited monitoring. It's forever how long they're going to be there.
Thank you. So leading into my next question then, in regards to noise monitoring, what noise monitoring do we currently do as a city of this location?
Through you, Madam Mayor, they are currently subject to noise management condition, which is essentially reads noise management, including the use of appropriate acoustic barriers and low noise front end loaders, and they also can't have front end loaders prior to 7 a.m. operating from the site. We haven't had any complaints since this application was lodged in August 22. I've confirmed that this evening with the Manager of Environmental Health. And so there hasn't been a need for the city to monitor noise from the site.
Okay. The conditions that are presented to council, my understanding is those conditions have come about because of all of the negotiations that have been happening with our acoustic specialist and all of the specialists with the city and also with the applicant as well. Is that correct, that these conditions have come about due to these ongoing negotiations?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, and as reiterated by the applicant's barrister this evening, the city has been involved in numerous mediations. They've had 2 noise consultants. Our noise consultant who presented this evening has really, you know, as he said to us, you know, he has gone to the nth degree to ensure that the measures put in place will not result in noise exceedances.
Final question. If any of these conditions are altered or changed, has the applicant given any indication of how they might proceed if we go fiddling with any of these conditions?
Through you, Madam Mayor, they have the agenda report, which is public at the moment, and I guess that their deputation this evening was on the basis of the conditions which are outlined. Obviously, they have options in the event that the council alters the conditions or in the event that they don't go with the officer's recommendation. And that is to go back to the State Administrative Tribunal and ask that the matter proceed to a hearing, or they may just withdraw their application.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor?
Yes, thank you. Just 2 questions. What steps will the city take if a noise complaint is lodged with the city? Can you take us the process? What will happen then?
I'll go to the manager.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the city's environmental health officers have noise monitoring equipment. They would obviously investigate the noise to see if it's still present. They are on call 24 hours a day, so there is that ability to attend almost immediately, and then they would take the equipment with them. Now, depending on how ongoing the noise is, would depend on whether they keep the equipment there. And look, that's my understanding of the process. Once they've monitored the noise, they then bring the machine back, and then the city's officers need to review that information to ensure that it is correct, and that they also apply different measures to that information depending on background noise and other tonal issues, which Marty did go into some detail this evening about. Does that answer your question?
Are they, yes, so just follow up, thank you. So are they able, the officer, is he able to, or she, to ask for the recordings that you mentioned before that they are having? Because from what I understand, they are doing recordings of the noise levels, and they will report once a year. So if there is a complaint, are we able to? Do we have the powers to go and ask the recordings during the last 1 month?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, that information is available to the city. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Manager. Just one final question. I did ask that just for the record. Are residents in that area aware that this item is coming up before us because we only have one deputation in support? Are they aware that we are discussing this?
Through you, Madam Mayor, all objectors and all submissions which were received as part of the development application, they have been advised.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson?
Thank you. Sorry, can I just get some clarification? Something Councillor Ostaszewski asked. Just wasn't sure of the answer. So, is the city actively monitoring noise and dust at the site?
I'll go to the manager.
Through you, Madam Mayor, no, we don't. It's on them as part of their conditions of development approval, which were imposed by the State Administrative Tribunal back in 2015, and they've met those requirements each year. There have been variances which have been addressed through the process.
Thank you for the clarification.
Sorry, I'll just ask a follow-up question. Does the city actively monitor approval conditions on all of our other businesses that get approved?
No, we don't. So development compliance is as a result of written complaints only.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Latta?
Can I just clarify? I didn't quite catch what happens once, if you received a complaint, there is the officers go out and do the readings, and you bring it back and you determine that they're over the level expected. Oh, two questions really. Firstly, does that happen at the site? Is that where the readings are taken? And secondly, what happens after that if you determine that they are higher than the conditions?
Through you, Madam Mayor, under the Environmental Protection Act, there are obviously requirements which they will need to assess the noise readings which have been taken. So the monitoring equipment is taken onto the site, and it's either, I mean, it depends on the circumstances whether the noise has already occurred or is it continuing to occur. As I said, it is a 24-hour response, so the officers would try to get there when the noise is still happening. Now, depending on the outcome of the readings, which they assess when they come back to the office, they bring the machine back to the office and then review the readings, then they would consider whether they're outside of the requirements of the Environmental Protection Act, and then they can take appropriate measures as a result. If it's an extreme case, then they can apply for a noise abatement fine. And so, there are a number of measures, or they may work with the landowner to ensure that the noise source, it may be a grinding cog on a machine or something, so they might ask them to sort of, fix that or whatever. It's very much a case-by-case basis.
Any other questions, councillors? If not, I'll go to the next item, which is 11.2, Councillor Bull feasibility study for Bayswater City Soccer Club. Any questions on this item? No. I'll go to the next one, which was 11.3, notice of motion, Councillor Peterson Pick, Deputy Mayor, potential land acquisition for parking in Maylands. Councillor Latta, no, I'll just see if there's questions, and if there are, then I'll ask for you to leave the room. There is a question. Sorry. Councillor Ostaszewski.
Thank you. In the report, it talks about the Maylands Activity Centre parking strategy. In that strategy, it identifies, I think, several zones within that region, and then there are recommendations of things that the city can implement to address parking. So, and that report talks about 1 to 2 years, 2 to 5 years, etc., and ongoing. I'm just wondering, is the city able to provide an update on where we are at with implementing all of those recommendations from that strategy?
Thank you. I'll go to the manager.
Through the chair, we provide an update on the progress on that strategy as a part of the annual auditing, but we can provide you an update now. It will just have to come through later.
I'm happy for that to be taken on notice, of course, because there's quite a few strategies in there, and even if it's as simple as green, yes, done, orange, working on, red, not started, something very simple to understand would be great, or whatever you feel is appropriate. Thank you. Ta.
Thank you. Any other questions on this item? If not, could we please get Councillor Ladder back in the room? So, councillors, are there any other questions for any other items? Councillor Bull.
10.2.1, please.
Go ahead.
Thank you. And it relates to the second limb of the officer's recommendation. And so if we jump to table 1, that describes the proposed changes to fees and charges. So my question is, were council to adopt these fees and charges, would there be any people or organisations that hire any of these rooms that would now be subject to a higher fee than they currently otherwise are?
I'll go to the director.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. My understanding is that the proposed fees and charges are aligned with what has been quoted to community groups. When we took over the Morley Sport and Recreation Centre, we had limited information. So this is now reflecting what our discussions with the community groups in terms of what has been agreed in terms of payment. But I will reconfirm that before council next week and provide that to you by email.
Any other questions on this item? If not, are there any questions on any other items on the agenda? Councillor Ladder?
Can I ask a question about 11.1, please, the reserve reallocation?
Go ahead.
I'm wondering if somebody can explain to me why there are 2 separate reserves, one for FOGO and one for waste generally. I feel like there's probably a reason behind it.
I'll go to the director.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you. The FOGO reserve is purely to fund the implementation of FOGO, whereas the general waste reserve relates to the city's ongoing waste service that it delivers each year, and we treat those very separately. FOGO had some funding contributions, so that's put aside specifically for that purpose.
And just another question around this. There's some small funds that have remained allocated to particular groups and facilities, and I guess I just wanted to hear a bit about the rationale for that. I don't know, can I ask a question of a councillor, of Dan maybe for
Councillor
the
Bull,
motion?
do you wish to answer?
I assume he would be better placed than the city to answer the question around that.
So, yeah, if you're happy to answer. Councillor, yeah.
Yes, so the previous iteration of what is before us came in a council workshop, and through the deliberations and discussions, I felt that there was a sense that there was an element of the council that had concern about those particular reserves being folded into larger reserves at that time. And then in my discussions with the city, what I understood to be the case is that these will naturally roll off anyway, so they're not going to be around for very long. And on that basis, looking for a kind of position that is somewhat a compromise position across what is important to different councillors based on what I've heard, I felt that it was appropriate to keep those limited, smaller reserves in situ, which from the advice that I've received from the city will naturally roll off sooner than later anyway.
Can I just ask the city then how that works, how those smaller funds do roll off?
I'll go to the director.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Council now is in a position where it has a draft forward capital works plan, and progressively as we identify projects that could be funded from those smaller project-specific reserves, we will fully allocate them and then the reserve will close.
So does that mean that those projects might be able, so that those funds will be able to be like discharged sooner under that process?
Through you, Madam Mayor, the decision of timing of those smaller projects is still a decision of council as part of its budget process.
Any other questions on this item? No? Are there any other questions on any other item? Councillor Johnson.
Apologies. 10.1.1 Strategic Community Plan Major Review.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So really my question is just about the timing. So looking at the project plan, so it's talking about, this is doing a one plan for 2025 to 2035, but it looks to me like it's going to be delivered April, May 2025. I'm just wondering how that feeds into the, that would be a future council's decision-making process, which would assume would come with sort of budgeting and changes to priorities. I'm just wondering about how that timeline fits into that timeframe.
Thank you. I'll go to the CEO.
So through you, Madam Mayor, if I understand the question, it's in relation to the timing because it won't be delivered until next financial year. So we're currently under the current strategic community plan, but obviously because there's significant community engagement, then the lead-in time for the new one, which is a full review, it's not just a desktop review, will take some time. So once that is finalised, that will inform then your next year's, the year after budget, which would then be the 25-26 and beyond.
Thank you. Yeah, if I could just clarify, so yeah, my question kind of is around the timing. So if we're adopting this in April or May 2025, it's too late to probably, I don't know, be well into budget preparations for that financial year. So
Through you, Madam Mayor, it would be hoped that some of the themes coming out of that engagement process will be able to inform, but it won't be fully adopted until later in that process. But we certainly would be able to bring in the themes to inform that process for you, Councillor.
yeah, okay, I can see that would be useful. Thank you.
Any other questions on this item? If not, any other questions on any other items? Councillor Latta?
Can I ask another question about 11.1?
Is it to the officers?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just wondering, based on what you were saying about it still being a decision of council, what the director was saying about it still being a decision of council about when those funds get allocated, what then is the function of reserves being allocated to a particular project versus it being in the long-term financial plan?
I'll go to the director.
Sorry, through you, Madam Mayor, can you just rephrase the question so I understand? Thank you.
So I'm looking to understand why what the benefit is or otherwise of having reserves allocated to specific projects when they're without perhaps a decision about the timing of those projects being made yet.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. The initial work that the administration conducted recommended not having project-specific reserves, so our recommendation would still be roll things up into the larger asset class-based reserves that gives council flexibility of the application of those funds during each budget cycle. I understand through Councillor Bulls NOM that he felt it important to retain a few of those smaller project-specific reserves, so we can accommodate that as well.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I will add that it's a good point. And when I originally put forward the idea of a notice of motion for this, I didn't actually draft a notice of motion. I drafted a set of principles that that I asked to be considered, and one of them was how to manage these smaller ones. And the advice I got from the city is the easiest way is to just retain them, as opposed to dealing with them in a different way. And we met afterwards and came to an agreement between us that that is the most straightforward way to deal with them. And that advice came out of my original email that I'm happy to share with everyone, actually, which is just a set of principles that to guide what we have before us. Yeah.
Any other questions on any other items? If not, then I will close this agenda briefing forum at 7:52 p.m. Thank you, councillors and officers.